April 12th. You know what I've noticed when I go back and check my videos, make sure they work? I always start them with okay or all right. I don't know why. It's just, sorry. I guess I could change it up. So what should I say? I'll see what I can do Friday, okay? All right. So slide 21, talking about, I'm going to change my color, talking about just looking at the layers of the digestive tract. So this is small intestines. Best example, there are 3 major layers. So you have the mucosa layer, and that, if you notice, is the innermost layer. So mucosa means, well, it's going to be lined with epithelial cells, because you only find mucous membranes and goblet cells, not globlets. Goblet cells in epithelial tissue or associated with epithelial tissue. Then you have the middle layer, the muscularis, and this is smooth muscle. We've already talked about smooth muscle and peristalsis and the mixing action. And then the outermost layer is the serosa, or the visceral peritoneum. It's the serous layer. And so note also, within the digestive system, there are little lymph nodes scattered about. In fact, a doctor has told me, and I've read it as well, that a lot of your immunological surveillance, I think up to 70%, is within the digestive system. Which, at first, I was really surprised, but then it does make sense. I mean, everything is coming into your mouth, and you're swallowing it. You have a lot of surveillance from the immune system going on in the digestive tract. So, know your 3 major layers, okay? And we'll talk more about some of this stuff later. Remember, the stomach had 3 distinct muscular layers. It's like longitudinal, circular, and I want to say transverse. I drew a really, so longitudinal, circular, and oblique. Okay? When we're looking at the intestines, we have 2 muscular layers instead. So there's 3 layers in the stomach, 2 layers in the intestines, and so we have a circular layer, which is this one right here, and then we have, I guess we'd call that longitudinal layer, I could be wrong, as a second layer. So you only have 2 layers of smooth muscle and running in different directions in the intestines instead of 3 like the stomach. So that's a kind of a neat fact to remember. So secretions, things that you are going to be secreting in your stomach, helping with the digestive process. So as we've used the term chyme before, this is the food that you've eaten, you've swallowed. It's in your stomach now, and it's mixed with your stomach secretions, and it's more liquidy, and it's being broken down. That's chyme, all right? And if you don't remember already, mucus is important in the entire alimentary canal, and in the stomach especially, because that's where we have some really strong enzymes and really strong hydrochloric acid. And we don't want it to actually reach the tissue of the stomach, because then it will start eating it away, and then you could get a perforation and all sorts of awful things could happen. So we don't want that. So the mucus cells, the mucus that's produced is very important. So mucus is viscous, which means it's thick, and alkaline. What does alkaline mean? Basic, yeah. Which, if it's basic and our hydrochloric acid is really strong, you add a strong acid and you have a base, kind of helps neutralize that region before you get to the stomach wall itself, preventing damage. Okay, so that mucus, yes, protects against that chyme, which is the mixture, which includes that strong acid and enzymes. So specifically, so the chyme is acidic, and then there's a particular enzyme that is also pretty hazardous to the health of your stomach, which is called pepsin. Pepsin is a really important enzyme. We'll talk more about it later. So interestingly enough, if you notice here, if your stomach lining, the stomach mucosa, so the lining of your stomach gets irritated, your stomach responds by producing more mucus to help protect it, help reduce the irritation. Now, there are some people who are predisposed to problems with their stomach. Usually it's producing too much acid, which can get through and start causing ulcers. And so not everybody has a perfectly functioning stomach. So in my family, everyone kind of has sensitive stomachs, and yay! Mucus is apparently not doing its job as well in the stomach. Hope you guys don't have to deal with that. Intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is made by the parietal cells. So in the previous lecture on Monday, we showed the picture of the stomach histology and the different cells and what they secrete. So you do need to know that. So for a quick backup, this is that slide, slide 20. The different types of cells, so mentioned right here, you need to know what the cell produces, what's the name of the cell, okay? I expect you to know that. So moving forward again, so intrinsic factor is made by parietal cells. Why is that important? Well, it has a relationship with vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is essential for the production of, do you remember? Red blood cells. Red blood cells. So going back to the blood, if you don't have enough vitamin B12, a person would get a particular type of anemia, the pernicious anemia. Okay, so B12 is really important in blood production and DNA synthesis. So we also need to say RBC, red blood cells. Okay. Hydrochloric acid is also secreted from the parietal cells. Okay. Hydrochloric acid pretty much kills anything, breaks down almost anything. There are a few things can get by hydrochloric acid, but that's later for you when you take microbiology, which is a really fun class, by the way. Kills bacteria. Here's a nice, interesting one. Stops carbohydrate digestion. So on Monday we talked about how amylase, an enzyme, is present in your saliva. So you start chemical digestion when you're chewing your food. So that amylase helps break down the carbohydrates. But once it gets to the stomach, hydrochloric acid stops the carbohydrate breakdown process. Okay? It's important to remember. So it activates the amylase, the enzyme that's secreted in your saliva. Denatures proteins. Do you guys remember what denature means? It breaks it down, so it's unfolding the proteins, and then, it breaks it down eventually into individual, what are the building blocks of protein? Amino acids. Yeah, so eventually breaking it down to individual amino acids that your body needs to build proteins. Okay. In addition, hydrochloric acid converts the molecule pepsinogen to pepsin. And this is important. So pepsin helps I don't want to say it. Let me just double check. So for now, helps convert pepsinogen to pepsin. I'm just going to say it helps down with the breakdown of proteins as well. I could be wrong, and if I am, I'll tell you. So pepsinogen is a product that's excreted into the stomach by exocytosis. Don't really need to worry about that unless there's a particular cell that's producing pepsinogen. The chief cells, okay? So chief cells produce pepsinogen. So made by chief cells, okay? So now we're going to talk about, there's several different phases of secretions that are happening when in the process of eating and digesting. And so we need to know these different phases. So the first one is cephalic. Cephalic is talking about the head, okay? So with the cephalic phase, I love these pictures because it breaks it down real easy and tells you what's going on. Starts with seeing, smelling, thinking about food, even touching food, okay? And that can trigger the production of saliva. We've talked about that a little bit on Monday, how just the anticipation of food or seeing food can make you start salivating. That's the beginning of the cephalic phase, okay? So all of these functions will trigger, all these things right there, will trigger the cephalic phase. And that goes to the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata is going to play a big role in digestion and swallowing. Okay, this is that important part of the brain stem. So that information travels down to the stomach through the vagus nerve. Vagus nerves, remember those? And what does it do next? Well, it triggers, right here, parietal and chief cells to secrete histamine and gastrin in the stomach. Okay? So information goes to medulla oblongata, sends information down the vagus nerves, tells the stomach, time to release histamine and gastrin. Okay? Now, the next step, what does gastrin do? Gastrin actually travels from the stomach into the circulatory system. Okay? So it goes into the bloodstream, and it actually comes back around and acts on the stomach itself, which is kind of interesting. So it's carried throughout the stomach and back into circulation, back to the stomach, where it stimulates secretion of more histamine. Okay, so this is kind of like a positive feedback thing that will stop once you start eating the food. Okay, so this is the part where you're not actually chewing the food yet. This is all kind of anticipation or touching or smelling or thinking about the food. And this starts causing your stomach to churn and the saliva to pour. So this triggers the secretion of those two important products, and it continues it as long as we have this stimulation or food starts coming in. Okay? So after the cephalic phase, we have the gastric phase, which is where the stuff is actually gastric phase, where food's actually entering into the mouth and you're swallowing it. Okay? When you swallow the food, when your stomach's empty, it kind of shrinks up. Doesn't stay full unless you've got gas, I guess. So when you start eating and swallowing food, it starts filling up your stomach, and it causes it to start to stretch. Okay, and so when the stomach stretches, it's going to stimulate mechanoreceptors that physically bend as the stomach is stretching. And when that does that, it is going to activate the parasympathetic reflex, which, remember, parasympathetic is our rest and digest division of the autonomic nervous system. And so what does that do? That sends the information that, hey, the stomach's getting full. There's food in there. It's stretching. Sends that information up through the vagus nerve to the medulla oblongata. Okay? Stomach stretches, information goes through the vagus nerve to your brainstem, the medulla oblongata. Then what happens? The medulla oblongata then sends signals back to the stomach. Okay, so that's number 2 on your list. If you're when you're studying, read through these really carefully. So the vagus nerve, it shows it. Vagus nerve is sending signals to the medulla oblongata and then sending signals back out. And so from the medulla oblongata, it is stimulating the parietal and chief cells and also stimulating gastrin and histamine secretion. Okay, so still the same 2 chemicals or molecules from the cephalic phase. So this part it's triggered by this distension of the stomach instead of smelling, touching, anticipating food. Okay, so in addition to the stretching of the stomach and triggering the release of histamine and gastrin, it also increases stomach secretions, okay, local reflexes. So that's number 3, where it also stimulates even more. And then, so gastrin, remember from the previous slide, gets into the circulatory system. So gastrin goes back into the circulatory system just like it did in the cephalic phase. and it circulates and comes back to the stomach, and it continues, again, that positive feedback thing where the presence of gastrin stimulates the secretion of even more gastrin and histamine. Okay? So it stimulates the secretion. Now, intestinal phase, and we'll go after this, kind of talk a little bit more about what each of those chemicals like gastrin, etc. do. We're going to get through our, let me double check something. Secretion, okay. So third phase is intestinal phase, or gastrointestinal. So once you've swallowed food and it's mixed with those enzymes, it's kind of liquefied, we call that the chyme. So it's in the stomach, or finally moves into the first part of the small intestine, the duodenum. So while the chyme is in the stomach, the pH is very low. It's very, very acidic. But I don't know if you remember Monday we talked about the pH in the stomach is very different than the pH in the small intestine. You don't want it to stay acidic in there. So as soon as chyme starts to move into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, if the pH is less than 2, or if there's fat digestive products, so two things to think about, it will inhibit gastric secretions. Okay? So if it's too acidic, so right there, too acidic, stop the secretions, because we do not want really strong acids in our duodenum. And the other thing that would stop those same secretions is a fatty, lipidy food meal, okay? So how this works, if the pH is less than 2, you have little chemoreceptors in the duodenum, the very first part of your small intestines, and they will pick up on the fact that we're going to say the pH is less than 2. Not good. So what that does, that information that the pH is less than 2 is sent via the vagus nerve up to the medulla oblongata, saying pH is too low, we've got to fix this problem. So then the medulla oblongata responds by sending action potentials back to the stomach that inhibit, can I draw that? That inhibit secretions. So if you're inhibiting gastric secretions in the stomach, like hydrochloric acid, that will help increase your pH so that it is less acidic. Okay? So that is one way to help with the pH problem. In addition, you also have local reflexes, and it says it's activated by hydrogen ions. Well, the definition of an acid is something that donates hydrogen ions to a solution. So the presence of hydrogen ions indicates that it is acidic. Okay, so that's why hydrogen ions they're important here. So hydrogen ions, which indicates acidity, or lipids, will also inhibit the secretion. So that's your local reflexes in orange. Okay, so 3 is what's going on here, inhibiting those. And then the last step, number 4, we have 2 new secretions we haven't talked about yet. One is secrete 10, and the other is cholecystokinin. Okay, these are 2 secretions made by the duodenum. Duodenum, again, is this first part. Oh, I didn't draw that very well. Is the first part of the small intestine. Okay, and so your duodenum, this dude right here, secretes secretin and cholecystokinin. What do those do? Well, hey, they go into the bloodstream just like gastrin does, but they have different effects. Secretin and cholecystokinin travels into the circulatory system, acts on the stomach itself, and inhibits gastric secretion. So you have 3 mechanisms that are inhibiting gastric secretions. First of all, you have a signal sent to the medulla oblongata if the pH is too low. That sends a signal to decrease, oh wait, hold on, let me back up. Yep, sends a signal to decrease gastric secretions. Okay, so that's the signal sent back out by the medulla oblongata. Then we also have the duodenum. We have local reflexes that are triggered by chemoreceptors right into the duodenum to decrease secretions in the stomach. And then lastly, if the pH is still too low and there's lipids in there, the duodenum itself secretes and cholecystokinin, travels in the bloodstream back to the stomach and tells it to inhibit gastric secretion. So there's three different mechanisms that are inhibiting the secretion of those acids and those strong enzymes, so that once the chyme is in the duodenum, it's not going to damage the duodenum and further digestion can occur. Okay, so we're going to talk about each of those hormones now a little bit more that we've mentioned in the previous slides, all those secretions. So gastrin, we talked about gastrin in the cephalic and in the, was it the gastrointestinal phase? The first two phases. Yep. Oh. Yes. Okay. So gastrin, what is it stimulated by? Oh. It could have said something, folks. All right. We'll start with this slide on Friday, and my goal is to finish this Friday. Okay? So please work on your homework, study, look ahead so you're ready. Thank you.